So this morning class, we will be, continuing our discussion about the methodology section. We will just have our discussion about experimental research, and then we'll move on to the mixed method. And then after that, we are done with the research designs. We will be talking about the other subsections of the methodology. Okay, yun, Vine? Okay? So, experimental research. This is under quantitative research. So, definitely, we will have a lot of numerical data here. And this is not hypothesis-free. Meaning, if you are going to do experimental research, you will always have a hypothesis. We will always have like a tentative solution to the problem at hand. And since we have hypothesis, we are going to test if that hypothesis is correct or not. Since this is testing now, so this is future-oriented. We will be looking into the future if our intervention or our hypothesis is correct. It is effective or not. Ano, may effect ba siya or wala? So in experimental research, we always have the independent and dependent variables. When you say independent variable, it's the one being manipulated in the study, and it is also known as predictor variable. Meaning by manipulating this variable, we will predict whether it is effective or meron ba siyang activity or action into another variable, and that variable is called dependent variable or our outcome variable. Okay, so in experimental research class, it will be more strict compared to the other research design. We will be more objective with this, systematic, meaning we will follow a certain stage or procedure on how to gather our data, and we have controlled investigations here. As much as possible, we will get rid of all the biases that may affect or it might cause or may cause variation to the results. Okay? So we will be like predicting activities or effect of one variable again to another. So we will be establishing cause and effect relationships for our experimental research. Independent variable is the one being manipulated or controlled in the study. Iko-control natin siya. Tayo ang mamimili. How do we control that? For example, you have a plant material. Okay? Ito lang yung ibibigay natin sa ating subject or sa ating, example, animals. If we are going to use animals, or ito yung treatment na ibibigay natin for our microorganism. Okay? Iko-control natin siya. Ito lang siya na plant material. Mako-control natin what part of the plant material, how are we going to process this material. Even the dose can be controlled, manipulate natin. And then at the same time, yung mga other controls like positive control, we have the say for that. Like we can choose what positive control are we going to use. That's what I mean with independent variables are variables that are controlled in the study. Kasi the outcome cannot be controlled. We will just be measuring it based on the activity of the independent variable. Okay, so I hope that is clear. The outcome class is called the dependent variable. So again, we can always establish cause and effect relationships when it comes to experimental research. Our problem with experimental research is its artificiality. Most of the time, we don't do experiments in its natural setting. Especially, for example, if it is drug discovery, like you are looking for a certain antibacterial agent or anthelmintic agent, antifungal agent, or even antiviral agent, we don't usually administer those things. to its natural setting, like ipapainom talaga sa human subject. We don't do that in the laboratory. Most of the time, if it's like an antimicrobial agent, we only do in vitro studies. Diba? We just have our laboratory equipment ready, and most likely if it's like antibacterial or even antifungal, let's just measure the zone of inhibition. That's how we know whether it is effective or not. But it's still artificial. Even for like laboratory animals, diba, the agent or the drug is supposedly given to humans, but we do experimentation with the animals, the laboratory animals. So there is artificiality here when it comes to experimental research. And then another thing we have here, feasibility. Kaya ba? Kasi minsan sa school, we want to conduct a certain research but the equipment is not available, or we as researchers are not capable of doing it, or sometimes we have a problem with the budget. Kasi when you say experimental research, expected yan na it will really cost you a lot. Okay, so again, we may have problems with the artificiality and feasibility of this kind of research design. And at the same time, unethical. Kasi sabi ko kanina, we may use laboratory animals, but remember, these animals have rights also. So we have to make sure na as much as possible, they will not feel any pain. And if ever meron, we can like devise any like procedure to just alleviate the pain that they are going to feel. Okay. And aside from that, we also have like clinical trials, but we don't do that in the school. When you say clinical trials, these agents are really administered to human subjects. But again, we don't do that in the school kasi that will be very unethical. Only those companies that are like merong permit to do clinical trials are allowed to do that. Okay, kasi very unethical yan. Pag idiretso mo bigay yung substance mo sa tao. Okay? Substance? Wala. Chat actually. Naghihintay ako ng chat. Anyway. Now, take note of this. The simplest experimental design includes the following. I have mentioned already 2 variables a while ago. That's the IV and the DB. Let's not dig deeper into that. We are done with our discussion. But the other one is we have 2 groups of participants. Most of the time, we have control in the experimental group. So the experimental group will receive the intervention that you are proposing. So if it is like a thrombolytic agent or thrombolytic agent, the one that will receive the plant material proposed to be a thrombolytic agent is called the experimental group. And then we have a control. It can be a positive control or a negative control. A positive control means we are giving intervention that is already proven and tested to uh to ano give an effect na expected natin. Kung negative naman, syempre yung wala talagang effect. Pero most of the time, 2 groups of participants yan. Sa school, mas marami sa atin yung 3 groups of participants. Because aside from the experimental group, we always include the positive and the negative control. Now, what are the characteristics of our experimental research design? Syempre, this is usually numeric and it will cater sophisticated statistical design. So, karugtong ng experimental research si statistics. Kasi we are always going to make sure and establish the validity and reliability of our numerical results. And most of the time, we are limited to small samples only. Unlike when we are going to do a survey, we can conduct survey to hundreds of people. But when it comes to experimental research, we will be limited to small samples only. Most of the time, we will just do 3 trials with like three replicates. Yun lang mostly yung ginagawa natin. That's the minimum. Okay? And then this is syempre labor intensive. If you are working in the laboratory, talagang labor intensive yun. Okay? Now please take note, when can you say that your research is a true experimental research design? Okay? So we have here the first one, manipulation. We will manipulate our independent variables. Okay? We can manipulate what intervention are we going to give to that certain problem. We can manipulate how much of that intervention are we going to give also. If it's a plant material, we can manipulate kung anong part yung gagamitin natin. And at the same time, we control. Okay? We control that we have groups to be given with that proposed intervention, and we have groups that we are going to control, meaning either they will be given a positive substance, positive control, or we are just going to not give them anything. And let's just say it's the control or the negative control. Okay? And the most important thing is randomization. Randomization when it comes to distributing or assigning our subjects to the different groups. Kailangan always random. Please take note, if there is no randomization, it cannot be called a true experimental research. I'll teach you how later. How are we going to do the randomization? So we have an example here of an experimental research. A medical doctor would like to introduce a new drug that will influence the cure for typhoid fever. So he will use two groups of patients. So again, we have two groups here. The experimental group using experimental na group with the drug, new drug na ipopropose niya. And then meron siyang control group. This is most likely a positive control kasi the doctor will be using the ordinary drug which is already proven and tested. So experimental research design siya. Now the patient should be randomly assigned to this group's class. Again, para matawag siya na through experimental research design. Now, just like our descriptive research design, meron tayong different types, subtypes under this one. Kasi diba, descriptive, we have the survey, correlational, comparative, and so on. Pagdating sa experimental, may mga specific experimental designs pa ito. You really have to know this kasi this is one of the questions na unang itatanong sa inyo during the defense. All of you should know what research design is used in your own study. Okay. Present. Sige. Noted. Sige. Let's start with this one. Different experimental designs tayo ha. Okay, sige. First one is pre-experimental designs. Pag pre-experimental designs class, experimental pa rin ito pero this is not a true experimental research design ha. So ilalagay nyo lang sa paper nyo that your study is a quantitative pre-experimental research design. Now under this, we have the specific ones, the one-shot case study. You may also do single group pre and post-test design, static group comparison, and parallel equated to group design. Let's talk about them one by one. If your research design is experimental one-shot case study, That means you only have one group. Again, one group lang ha. Sabi ko kanina, di ba, 2 groups yung ating true experimental. At least 2 groups. Ito, one group lang talaga. Now, itong one group of participant nyo will be given the treatment. Okay? Bibigyan siya ng treatment. Pagkatapos mabigyan ng treatment, diretso ka na agad sa post-test. Okay? Sample, may dugo ka, may blood ka from your subjects, okay, from your donors. Nagtatrabaho ka for a thrombolytic agent. So yung blood, nilagyan mo na siya ng treatment agad, tapos chinek mo na agad yung example time of coagulation niya. That's the post-test. And we call that one-shot case study. Wala tayong control dito, meaning we are not going to compare it to either a positive control or a negative control. Yun lang talaga ang titingnan natin. You have one group of participants and direction na with the treatment and the post-test. Okay? Yes. Andali lang class ha, may tao. Medyo na siyang problem with online class. Wait lang, the report. Okay, so that is for the one-shot case study class ha. The second one is the single group pre and post-test. So ganito yung magiging design niya. You will conduct first a pre-test for your single group. Isang group lang talaga, walang control. Diretso na experimental group. So after that, you will give the treatment or the experimental variable. Pag bigay mo ng treatment, you will conduct a post-test. Again, that is called single group pre and post-test. Anong ginagawa dito? For example, meron kang group of like participants. Tapos, chinek mo yung kanilang baseline blood glucose level. That's the pre-test. I-check mo. Ano kaya kataas yung blood glucose level nila. After knowing their blood glucose level, you will be giving the intervention or the treatment. So, papainumin mo sila ng whatever gamot na ibibigay mo sa kanila. And then after that, after giving the treatment, you will again check their blood sugar level. That is called the post-test. Okay, so since they are one group only, you don't have a control, we call that single group pre and post-test experimental research design. Okay, and then we also have the static group comparison, wherein we have 2 groups ha. Meron tayong 2 groups for this one. One has knowledge over the treatment or experience over the treatment, and then the other one don't have. Tapos, diretso mo na silang i-test in terms of their, like, yung sa variables, kung anong outcome yung ine-expect mo. Tapos, i-compare mo na sila diretso. Okay, this is just to establish the effect of that X or that treatment. Okay, most of the time we use this static group comparison for like testing the efficacy of a method or yung parang training, for example. Itong isa nag-training and then yung isang group of participants hindi nag-train. So, itetest natin, example, yung level of knowledge nila over about an information or about a topic. So, i-check natin kung effective ba yung training or hindi. That's static group comparison. Okay? So, wala kang binigay sa other group. Wala siyang training, whatever, wala. Diretso na silang iti-test. We call that static group comparison. And then we also have under the pre-experimental research design, the parallel equated two-group design. Again, hindi ito sila lahat through experimental research ha. Kasi number 1, ito walang randomization. Kahit dalawang groups of participants pa yon. Ito, you still have 2 groups of participants. You will be doing pre-test for both groups. Again, pre-test for both groups ha. And then, hindi pala ito post-test. This one is giving the treatment. Pero you have two different treatments here. The one is the process method. Ito yung pinopropose mo na solution or intervention. And then the other one will receive the traditional method, which means ano yung nakasanayan na method. Tapos you will be doing a post-test sa kanila. Okay? To check if there is like a difference between these two types of methods. So this is again the parallel equated two-group design. So for example, ano ba example nito na study? You will be doing a pre-test for all the students when it comes to their like knowledge about sa certain concept, example sa medtech. Tapos after the pre-test, makikita mo na ito yung level of knowledge nila. Tapos you will be grouping them. Again, walang randomization dito ha. One group will have the process method. Yung way of teaching is bago. Okay, bago na way of teaching this kind of concept. Tapos yung control will receive the traditional method. Kung paano siya tinuturo. Example sa school, yung concept na yun pa rin yung way ng pagtuturo sa kanila. Ito yung bagong method. Tapos, after that, magpo-post test ka ulit sa kanila and check whether ano na ba nangyari sa level of knowledge nila about that concept. Okay? So again, you will have two groups here, experimental and control group. However, what is missing here? There is missing in that in terms of randomization. So pag again, walang randomization class, matik na talaga yan na hindi siya pwedeng tawaging through experimental research design. Ang tawag nito natin sa kanila, pre-experimental designs only. Experimental pero hindi siya totoong experimental research design. Ito yung true experimental designs natin, class. The pre and post-test control group. Huwag kayong ma-confuse ha kasi may pre-test and post-test din kanina. Pero single group lang kasi yon. Ito we have pre and post-test control group. We also have Solomon for group design and the post-test only control group design. Now, if we're going to look at the design, almost similar with the previous one, we also have two groups here, but ano yung nadagdag? There is randomization. Therefore, if we are going to assign our subjects, our participants to the groups, we will do randomization. Okay? So we will have group 1, we will conduct a pre-test sa kanila. Okay, example blood sugar level again. Both of the groups will have the pre-test and then they will receive the treatment. Okay? And then afterwards, we will be doing the post-test. So this treatment for the group 1 may be experimental na treatment, meaning the proposal, yung proposal na intervention. Pwede siyang plant material, for example, or a new drug. Tapos yung isa will have the control. Okay? Control post-test ito, meaning pwedeng positive control yung ibibigay na treatment. Pwede din namang negative. Depende sa researcher. Okay? And then we have the Solomon for group design. 4 na grupo talaga ha ang sa Solomon for Solomon na design. Kasi kanina 2 lang. So this is 1, 2, 3, and the 4th group. And take note, hindi mawawala ang randomization sa 4 na grupo na yan. Kasi kasama talaga ng true experimental research design itong randomization. Now, what are we going to do with the Solomon for group design? The first group will be having the pre-test. Ite-test muna. Tapos, bibigyan ng intervention. Tapos, yung intervention ay yung proposal na intervention. Kung ano yung pinag-aaralan natin na substance, for example. And then, magpo-post test. Yan yung gagawin sa first group. Tapos, sa second group, there is still randomization, magpa-pretest, pero hindi bibigyan ng treatment. Okay? Hindi siya bibigyan ng treatment. Diretso na siya sa post-test. Okay? This is how we are going to get rid of biases and sources of variations. I-check talaga natin isa-isa kung meron ba talagang differences sa kanila. Nag-pretest and post-test ka ng may intervention, mag-pretest and post-test ka din ng walang intervention. Makikita mo talaga kung may pagbabago in the scores of the first participants. Now, sa number 3, ang third group, magbibigay ka diretso ng treatment, hindi ka class magpa-pretest. Pero after the treatment, you will have the post-test. Okay? And lastly, ang fourth group will receive no intervention at all. It will not even undergo pretest. Diretso lang talaga sa post-test. And then at the end of the experimentation, we will differentiate, okay, the scores of the participants sa bawat grupo. Okay? So in that case, we will really know if itong X na ito ay effective or not. Okay? Again, we call this Solomon 4 group design, and this is the most sophisticated research design under the true experimental research design. Okay? And then lastly, we have the post-test only control group. So, marami nitong study sa sa institution natin na post-test lang talaga, pero through experimental research design siya. Bakit? There is randomization here, and this at the same time we have at least 2 groups. One group will receive the treatment and will undergo the post-test, while the other one is controlled, pero we will still have the post-test. What is the example of this experimental research design? May study tayo class na anthelmintic sa laboratory. Anthelmintic ha, so they have Petri dishes class na may worm dyan. Okay. So the other one sa Petri dish will be given with the experimental substance, example plant material. Ilalagay talaga yan ha dyan sa Petri dish with the worms. Tapos itong Petri dish na ito, walang ilalagay. Pwedeng water lang para at least moist sila inside. Tapos walang pretest na nangyari ha. Pero magpo-post test, meaning i-check class kung yung time kung kailan mamamatay or kung hindi man mamatay, ma-paralyze yung helminths inside. That's a post test. Okay? Treatment tapos test na agad. Walang pre-test na nangyari. Kasi ano ka magpa-pre-test kung ang end mo nito is papatayin mo sila. Wala talagang pre-test dyan. Okay, so post-test siya diretso, but nevertheless, since there is randomization and we have at least 2 groups dito, through experimental pa rin, ang post-test only control group. Okay? Questions so far? Questions or clarifications before we go into the quasi-experimental design? I-mention ko na actually yung quasi-experimental design last time. Sige. Pero pag quasi-experimental design, pwedeng ganito. Pwedeng gayahin ang pre-test and post-test. Pwedeng gayahin ang Solomon 4 group. Pwedeng gayahin ang post-test only control. Post-test only control group. Pero, anong tanggalin? Walang randomization. We will call it a quasi-experimental research design. And most of the time, ito yung may mga time series na experiment. Okay? Ano ba ibig sabihin yan? Yung mag-check ka parati after 1 hour, after 2 hours, after the 3rd hour, the 5th hour, i-check mo lang kung ano na nangyari sa subject mo. Sample, yung worm. Yung worm ha, walang randomization, isang grupo lang talaga ng mga helminths. walang control. So, hindi mo siya pwedeng tawagin through experimental research design. Now, yung mga helminths na yan, nandito siya sa Petri dish. Tapos, i-check mo at on the first hour, kasi time series, on the first hour, ano na nangyari sa worm mo? Okay pa ba sila? Kung okay pa, so sige, check pa sila. Tapos on the second hour, i-check mo may na-paralyze na ba or may namatay na ba? So that's time series experiment. So since isang grupo lang ito, wala kang control, time series experiment, quasi-experimental research design lang talaga ito. Okay? So be careful ha, if mag-propose kayo ng experimental research, talagang i-observe nyo lahat yung ng characteristics of a true experimental research design para hindi kayo ma-question during the defense na tatawagin niyo siyang true experiment pero hindi niyo pala na-satisfy lahat ng requirements. So ano nga yung requirements na isa-satisfy natin? Remember, kailangan merong minamanipulate, merong kinokontrol, merong control, and at the same time, there is randomization. Okay? Randomization ng pag-assign ng mga subjects in a particular group. Okay? Questions, kasi that is the end of the experimental research design. Or wala pang questions kay ma'am, wala man ni study. So how? How are we going to do this? Kaya wala study. Wala? Sure na? So we will be talking about mixed method researches. Pag sinabing mixed method, we are really going to mix quantity and quality research. Okay? So we have three types also of our mixed method researches. We have convergent, parallel. We also have explanatory sequential and exploratory sequential. Anong ginagawa dito? Sa convergent parallel research design, we will collect both numerical data and linguistic data at the same time. Okay? At the same time. Meaning, for example, mag-i-interview tayo at the same time papasagutin natin sila ng questionnaire with numerical na sagot at the same time class. So we will treat both numerical data and linguistic data equally. Kaya siya tinawag na convergent parallel design. Okay? But the two data, the numerical data and the linguistic data will be independent from each other. Independent yung analysis sa kanila. Iba yung pag-analyze dito sa numerical data, we will be using statistical treatments or statistical tools. Iba din yung pag-analyze dito sa mga linguistic data or yung mga qualitative natin na data. Pero, even though separate yung kanilang analysis, we will mix the results together in the overall interpretation. So we will be looking for convergence or divergence. Meron bang magkapareho doon sa both data, numeric and linguistic data, or meron bang contradiction sa kanila? Or meron ba relationship between the two types of data? So the schematic diagram for a convergent parallel research design looks like this. You will be doing the collection of the qualitative data and at the same time the analysis of it. And then we have here quantitative data. Sabay silang kukunin. Sabay din silang i-analyze. Pero after the analysis, we will have a point of interface, meaning this is the time that we are going to compare both results, or we will look for relationship of both results before we will be doing an interpretation. So I have done this kind of study class, the convergent parallel, nung gumawa ako nung pharmacology laboratory manual. So nag-conduct ako ng qualitative data collection, nag-interview ako ng mga students sa kanilang experience in learning that subject, ano yung mga maganda nilang experience, ano yung mga hindi maganda, anong kulang, nag-interview ako sa kanila. Tapos nag-collect din ako ng quantitative data. So meron akong questionnaire na pinasagot din sa kanila. So meron akong numeric data din. Tapos pagkatapos ko yung ginawa, kinumpare ko na yung results ng mga sinabi nila dito sa interview and yung sagot nila doon sa aking questionnaire. And then gumawa ako ng aking interpretation. Okay? Questions? Wala? Sure? Mag-break tayo in a minute ha. And then kasi masyadong marami yung laman ng aking chat box. The librarian is calling my attention because of the researches delivered in the library. Sagutin ko lang siya. Break tayo in a while. Pero before that, let's have the explanatory sequential. Explanatory sequential ha, meaning may sequence tayo nito. Kasi yung sa convergent parallel, sabay silang kukunin. Dito, anong unang kukunin? Kukunin muna ang quantitative data. Again, dito na lang tayo tumingin para mas madali siyang maintindihan. Kukunin muna ang quantitative data. Pwede kang mag-survey or mag-experiment. Basta quantitative data. Tapos, i-analyze mo siya. Tapos, magpa-follow up ka by collecting a qualitative data before ka gumawa ng interpretation. Kaya siya explanatory sequential kasi gagamitin natin ang result ng qualitative data to explain the quantitative data. Okay, so for example, meron kang mga extreme values in the quanti na sign. So hindi mo siya maintindihan bakit kaya mataas ang score nila sa ganito na area. Bakit kaya mababa yung score nila sa ganitong area doon sa sa numeric data mo. So magkakandak ka ngayon ng interview, tatanungin mo sila bakit. Kaya yung sagot nila gagamitin natin pang-explain dito sa quantitative data natin. Okay, kaya siya tinawag na explanatory sequential. So two-phase ito, yung quanti and quali will be collected at a different time. And the qualitative study is actually dependent on the quantitative results. Yung mga questions natin sa interview will be dependent on the results of the quantitative. Okay, so ang quantitative data is given priority here. Okay, yung pinaprioritize natin yung quanti. Okay? Sige. So mag-break muna tayo, class. Okay. So we are done with the explanatory sequential. Let's move on. Oh, wait. I was not able to discuss this. Okay. Wala tayo nag-discuss. This one is an example of an explanatory sequential. So we have here, suppose I am conducting a general social survey for caregivers' attitude towards the elderly population. So nung nag-survey, yung findings daw ng quantitative study is merong high degree of caregiver stereotyping of the elderly population, especially with regards to issues sa race and gender. So ito yung nakuha na result for the quantitative collection of data. So yung researcher decided on the basis of these findings na magkakandak ng in-depth interview sa caregivers to explore yung attitude nila, yung stereotypical attitudes nila towards this one, yung issues of race and gender. So the focus of the interview or the inquiry was sparked directly because of the result doon sa quantitative na na study. So yun siya, yung mga questions na i-generate for the interview will surround here or will revolve here. Okay? So para ma-explain bakit kaya nangyari ito, bakit meron silang stereotyping with regards to issues sa race and sa gender. Okay, so parang baling yung qualitative study will just be a follow-up doon sa naunang i-conduct na quantity. Okay, so ano yan siya? Ang tawag dito, we call this sequential explanatory research design. So this is under the mixed method research design. Okay? Questions before we'll move on? So this one, wait lang ha. Wala. Sige. So let's continue. Now this is the third one and the last one. We have here exploratory sequential. So baliktad naman ito, class. Kung kanina nauna si quanti, tapos based sa results sa quanti, magkakonduct ng quali na study. This time, mauuna si qualitative before magkakonduct ng quanti na study. So this is also called instrument development design. Ang ginagawa kasi for exploratory sequential, most of the time, walang instrument na available or walang questionnaire na available para mag-conduct ng quanti. So para magkaroon ng basis yung researcher kung paano niya gagawin yung questionnaire niya, magkakandak muna siya ng qualitative research. Meaning, mag-i-interview muna siya sa mga concerned participants para alam niya kung anong questions yung gagawin niya para mabuo yung kanyang questionnaire. So, yun yung ibig sabihin na the exploratory sequential research design may be referred to as instrument development design. So, walang instrument na available, tapos hindi natin alam yung mga variables, talagang wala tayong alam paano natin gagawin yung questionnaire. O kaya walang theory or walang model as a guide. So, kaya magtatanong-tanong muna tayo sa kanila. Ano ba yung parang current situation or ano ba yung current phenomenon or ano ba yung kanilang perception over a concept or a topic para magkaroon tayo ng idea, ganito pala. So, ito yung sinabi ng mga concerned participants kaya meron na tayong guide para gumawa ng questionnaire. So, this will be the schematic diagram for our exploratory sequential. So again, quali muna, magko-collect tayo and mag-a-analyze, and then yung result ng quali ay gagamitin to make a questionnaire and conduct the quantitative data collection and at the same time, analysis before tayo magkakaroon ng interpretation. Okay? So we have this following example. We have comparing the practices of the rural and urban communities' attitude towards COVID-19. So yung number one question sa SOP, what are the practices of rural and urban settlers to control the transmission of COVID-19? So for example, wala talaga tayong guide kung ano ba talaga ginagawa sa city or sa mga bukid-bukid na area when it comes to control the transmission of the COVID-19. So ang gagawin, mag-i-interview muna tayo ng mga people in the city and also people sa rural areas. Tapos, pag meron na tayong qualitative na research, pwede na tayong mag-design ng questionnaire para ma-answer natin yung second question. Is there a significant difference in the level of practices of the rural and urban settlers to control the transmission of COVID-19? Kasi kapag one lang, qualitative data, hindi tayo makakapag totally differentiate. We cannot make a conclusion or a generalization. Pero yung paggawa ng questionnaire para ma-answer itong number 2, galing din sa number 1. So again, ang tawag dito class is exploratory sequential. Kabaliktaran ito ng explanatory sequential kanina. Okay? Questions? Wala? Sige. So, yun yung end ng research design. Pag meron na kayong class, research title, gawa kayo ng introduction and even the RRL. Tapos pag magsusulat na kayo ng methodology, ito yung una yung isusulat, ang research design. So dapat ma-identify nyo talaga. Specific na research design. So kung qualitative, isulat nyo talaga na the research design is qualitative. Tapos specify nyo what type of qualitative research it is. Like qualitative phenomenological research, ganon. Tapos i-discuss nyo, paano nyo nasabi na quali-phenomenological siya. Okay? Kung quanti naman, you really have to specify quanti-descriptive or quanti-experimental. Kung quanti-descriptive, isi-specify nyo pa talaga kung ano ba, you're going to do correlational research or comparative research lang siya and so on. Marami pa tayong types of descriptive research. And then, kung ano naman, quanti-experimental, specify niyo pa kung true experimental ba siya or pre or quasi-experimental. Tapos, di ba may mga specific types pa under those. Okay? Sige. Walang gustong itanong? Kasi we will move on to the next subsection of our methodology, and that is the research local. Okay? From the name itself, research local, what we are trying to identify here is the site or the venue wherein we are going to collect our data. Okay, so kung saan natin i-collect yung data natin. We really have to be specific with that. Now, if the venue is an institution, for example, you are going to collect your data sa GSD MSFI, doon kayo magkakandak ng experiment, or yung mga respondents ninyo ay mga estudyante sa GSD MSFI. So definitely that's an institution, right? You also have to include a brief history of the institution, and at the same time, the mission and vision together with other specific objective. Okay, so let us have an example of the research local. For a minute. Huh? Just sa file research. Here. Okay. Okay. So this is the methodology section ha. Ito yung research design nila. And ito yung research local. So let's see. The study is conducted in General Santos City, Philippines, a highly urbanized first-class city in Sub-Saharan Philippines. So, hindi lang siya basta-basta na pag sinabing research local, maganda kami sa Jensen, ma'am. And then that's it. No, you really have to be specific and you have to describe the area mismo. So just like this one, Jensen, talagang nag-describe sila what Jensen is, where is it located, basta ilan na yung residents dyan, and then yung mga barangays, iniisa-isa din nila. Okay? That's how you write the research local. So hindi naman necessarily mahaba, no? But just provide a description, okay, of your research local. It has have some more examples of this one. Hindi siya knowledge. Hindi na connection. Okay, sige. Okay, so here is the methodology. They have the research design, and after the research design, they have the research local. So as you can see, ganun pa rin the research. Although this is not the final paper ha, kasi hindi pa siya na past tense. Pero future tense kasi proposal paper kasi nila ito. So the research will be conducted in General Santos City, Barangay Kalumpang. So, eto, unlike the previous example, the whole Jensen kasi yung sa previous example. So, talagang dinescribe ang whole Jensen with all the barangays. Ito kasi specific lang sila with one barangay, and that is Barangay Kalumpang. So, if you are going to read the whole research local, what they are describing here is the Barangay Kalumpang only. Okay? With saan siya located and ano yung population mostly. Nilalagay talaga yung population ng isang area. Okay? Questions? Wait. Let us have an example ng experimental research. Kasi baka may mag-experimental research sa inyo. Meaning study yung experimental. Study experimental at sila kamar. Kamar. Okay. Oh yeah, this is experimental anticoagulant activity of podium fragile marine algae as an alternative for heparin additive. Yeah, this one is the next. Why? Ito yung problem. Ay, yun lang. Okay. Ito yung problem ko kanina. Mag-load. Wow. Oops, this should be the methodology already here. Why is it not loading? That's trying. Do I have problem with my internet connection? Sa ibang connection pala ako nakakonect. Wait, plus. This transfer has a Wi-Fi, so another connection. So let's try again. Ano problem talaga ito dito? Okay, so this one is the research local of the study, an example of an experimental research, no? Anticoagulant activity. Ito, medyo mahaba yung research local nila, ha? Bakit mahaba? Kasi number one, nilagay nila dito yung research local nila kung saan sila magkakandak ng experiment. And syempre, that is sa GSD-MSFI. So they have provided here description of where GSD-MSFI is located with the mission and the vision of the school and a little like ano a little ang tawag dyan, description sa ibang ginagawa sa school, like ano yung mga courses offered. Okay? And then, what else? Aside from that, meron pa sila ito. Yung, ayan, description kung saan nila kinuha yung kanilang plant material. So kapag experimental kasi ang research, marami kang research local. Aside sa kung saan ka magkakandak ng experiment, doon pa sa kung saan mo kukunin yung mga materials mo. Kung meron ka pang iba pa na kukunin, kasali pa dyan yung mga materials na iba na needed in your research, kasali pa siya, ilalagay dyan sa research local. So medyo mahaba yung research local for an experimental research. Okay? Do you have questions about the research local class? Wala pa, no? Wala ganing mo study. Wala pa ganing mo study. Question pa kayo sa research local. Okay. Now, aside from the research, do I still have time? Sige. Sige. Aside from the research local, we have here the sampling technique. Now, ito yung sinasabi ko na non-probability and probability sampling. Kasi most of the time, we don't do population study. Pag sinabing population study class, yung lahat talaga ng members of the population, isasali mo sa study mo. Most of the time, we don't do that, ha? Meron lang isang study last year na nag-population sample kasi sila. Kasi yung kanilang study is, I think, about senior high school students. And parang ang senior high school students na respondents nila ay parang hindi umabot ng 100. So the panelist class decided na mag-population study na lang sila. So lahat ng senior high school students pina-answer nila sa kanilang questionnaire. Pero kung masyadong marami talaga yung inyong population, umabot ng 100,000, syempre we cannot do population sampling or population study for that. Yung ating experimental study, we cannot do population sample. Imagine lahat ng bacteria itetest mo. So hindi ganon. Nagsasampling tayo, ha? So pag sinabing sample class, it's a representative taken from the population. Okay? Yan yung sinasabing sample. Okay? So sa sampling technique, under sa section na ito, you really have to identify the specific sampling technique that you are going to use in selecting your samples, and you provide description also on how you are going to do that. So dito, yung population and sample, magdi-discuss tayo what is the difference between the two. Si population, ito yung the whole universe of the study. So lahat ng members dyan kasali sa population. Lahat ng merong characteristics na hinahanap mo, yung parameters na kasali sila doon, isasali mo sila as members of the population. So for example, all the first year pharmacy students, lahat ng enrolled in GSD-MSFI na first year pharmacy student, population ang tawag sa kanila. O kaya all the RadTech faculty in GSD-MSFI, lahat ng RadTech teachers, isang population sila. Or pag sinabi mong the senior citizens in General Santos City, yung mga senior citizen residing in that area will be one population. Okay? So, pag isusulat mo sila under the sampling technique, i-identify mo yung population mo. Kung ano ito class, descriptive na study, we will call them respondents. Pero kapag qualitative study that you are going to conduct an interview, we will call them participants. So this time, since this is a survey na study, so in-identify niya talaga sino yung kanyang respondents. Ito yung population. So yung kanyang respondents are the members of the Senior Citizen Association of Cabanatuan City. And then, nag-provide siya ng description ng population niya, ng kanyang respondents. Okay, so ito yung respondents who account for 60% of the SSS retirees na select through purposive sampling. Let's talk about that later na lang. Pero ito yung tinatawag na population. So meron tayong finite population. This is the population that can be counted. So yung mga residents sa Jensen, remember we have the census. So kaya counted yun siya. Pero pag hindi mo na ma-count yung population mo, yung tawag natin dyan, infinite population. Okay? Just like the stars in the sky or the number of pedestrians that will cross the street. Na pag hindi mo kayang pag-aralan yung iyong population, that's the time you do sampling. So what is again a sample? A sample is a small group you take from the population and yun yung i-observe mo. Okay? So bakit hindi tayo nagpa-population study? Bakit nagsasampling tayo? Kasi it will be very expensive for us to get the entire population. And since masyadong marami yon, it will also take a lot of time for us to reach out everything, all the tag or everyone, so yung target population natin. And take note, since the sample is a representative of the population, we can still make generalizations. Kasi yung characteristics ng population natin andun pa rin naman sa mga samples kasi nga member sila ng ating population. So how are we going to do the sampling? Syempre, it will really start with the identification of the population. Identify muna, sino yung gusto mong pag-aralan? Mga millennials ba sa Jensen? Mga senior citizen ba sa Jensen? Or gusto mo senior citizen lang on a certain barangay? Identify niyo muna yon. And then you determine the required sample size. Okay? I-determine natin gaano ba karami. Ma'am, 100,000 ang residents sa Jensen. So pila ang sample? That's what we are going to determine. We call that sample size. Pag na-determine na yung sample size, that's the time we select. And that's the time I'll be teaching you the different sampling techniques that we have. But before that, and I think I'll be ending here, yung sampling size of the population can be computed using this one, the Slovin's formula. Okay, again, we call this the Slovin's formula. So this is just N is equal to capital letter N divided by 1 plus NE squared. By the way, this is NE squared. Kindly correct that para hindi kayo dito. Okay, this is NE squared. So for example, sabi ko kanina 100,000, this is just a hypothetical example. I'm not sure. Gano'n na tayo karami sa Jensen ngayon. We are more than this, syempre. So example, 100,000 yung population. Nang magpo-compute ka, sa 100,000, ilan yung magiging sample size? So capital letter, small letter n is the sample size. Capital letter N is the population size. So this is 100,000 here. Okay, please bear with my handwriting. I don't have my tablet now. So 1 plus, again, N is 100,000. Okay, times the E squared. E class is the margin of error. So since we are just doing sampling, we will not expect a 100% correct na data to be collected. So magbibigay tayo ng room for error. Okay? And the minimum for room for error is 5%. Okay? Again, that is 5%. So this is 0.05 and then squared. Okay? So let's compute. Again, this is 100,000 here divided by 1 plus 100,000. What is the square of 0.05? 0.05 squared is 0.00. I don't have my tablet. 0.025. Okay? And then let's do the math. Ito na lang ha, kaya wala na akong space. 100,000. Ano po yung iabot? Hindi na ako mag-ayon sa numbers ng dala. Para assuming lang po. Okay, 100,000 plus times 0.0025 is 250. This is 250. So 100,000, excuse me, class, wait. Okay, again, sorry for the interruption, class. So, asan na yun? 100,000 na yun, divided by 251. So, pila na to siya? 100,000 divided by 251 is 398. Ay, 398.4. Pero class, remember, you cannot do a survey sa 0.4 na tao. So you have to, this one, round it off. So this will just be 398. Okay? So if you have a population of 100,000, you will just do the survey to 398 people or individuals. Okay? That's how we do compute for the sampling size. Again, we call this the Sloven's formula. Okay? Do you have questions? How to do that? I have another way to solve for the sampling size. You can use the RAWSoft software. You can open your Google and just type RAWSoft calculator. Ito, hindi nyo na kailangan mag-compute, but this is still accepted, ha? This is still accepted. You just have to divulge in your paper na in computing for the sampling size, you use the sample size calculator by Rouse. So just click this one. Okay. And then, nalagot ako. Wait lang. My brother has a lot of shopping. Gosh, wait, plus. Plus pa sa iluad, jud ko. Mabuang ako din ano man eh. Murag kada 20 minutes na yung maabot. Grabe. Isuda. Okay, so this is the Rouse of software before tayo mag-end. Give me 2 minutes. This is the margin of error here, 5%. 5% lang talaga yan. So the confidence level is 95%. Huwag nyo na itong baguhin. 5% yung error. 95% we're confident na tama yung magiging result. So dito ito lang yung pakikialaman natin, yung population size. Yung response distribution 50%, huwag nyo na din yung pakialaman. Leave this as 50%. Now, ang population size, dito nyo ilalagay, no? For example, 100,000 din. Ayan. Meron lang silang counting difference with the Sloven's formula. What was their Sloven's formula kanina? 398. So, 398 kung Sloven's formula. Kung Rouse of na software yung gagamitin natin in the sample size calculator, ito yung recommended sample size. It's 383. So, ito yung number of people na bibigyan nyo ng questionnaire and ipapasagot nyo doon sa questionnaire ninyo. Okay, so again, meron lang silang very slight difference with that of the Sloven's formula, but this is still accepted. You don't need to compute. Ang tawag dyan, both are accepted, pero you really have to divulge in your paper kung ano yung ginamit nyo in the computation of the sample size. Whether you use Sloven's formula or you use this one. Okay? So, pag meron na kayong paper class, yun na yung gagawin ninyo. You identify the population, kung saan kayo magkakandak ng study, sino yung magiging respondents ninyo. And then after that, you compute for the sample size. Para wala nang magtatanong sa akin, ma'am, pila ka book among i-interview, ma'am, pila ka book among i-hatagan o questionnaire, ma'am. Okay? Yun na yun ha. Sloven's formula or Rouse of software. Okay? So,